Welcome to the World Language Essential Standards K-12 Modern Language Program Showcase webinar. This series focuses on language programs within our standards, including classical, dual and heritage, and modern. Today's broadcast is about modern language programs. We did have a broadcast in the fall on classical language programs and one earlier this spring on dual and heritage language programs, and those materials are already posted on the website for review. This one focuses on modern language programs, and we're going to be hearing today from a district that's got a wide range of modern language programs, and they're going to talk about how they have established those, maintained them, and even expanded their sequences K-12 on modern language programs. All K-20 World Language administrators, teachers, and instructors are welcome at all of these webinars, and I hope you learned something today as we discuss modern language programs in North Carolina. Today's agenda is coming up on the screen. My name is Anne-Marie Gunter. I'm the World Languages Consultant, your World Languages Consultant at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. We're going to start today with a welcome and overview. As I said, we're going to talk about our World Language Essential Standards, our state standards, and specifically how K-12 modern language programs are situated within our state standards. We'll have a focus on the Winston-Salem, Forsyth County Schools modern language programs, and we'll finish with some reminders and any questions that are remaining. Let's start today by having a quick poll question. Poll questions are a nice way to get information from you and also give us a way to pause and make sure we don't have any questions in the questions box to address. I want to know, what are your goals with today's webinars? And this is a question where you can check all that apply. Are you a teacher leader sharing information with colleagues? Are you an administrator gathering materials for local presentations? Are you an educator earning a contact hour for licensure renewal? Are you an individual getting a question answered? Or you just want to remain anonymous on a Wednesday afternoon? I'm going to go ahead and launch our poll question. That will bring it up on the screen for you as a poll question. And then you can click on the answers that you want to share. I'll go ahead and give you a moment to do that and check our questions box. I see that many of you have voted. We'll take 10 more seconds so everybody can get their vote in on this poll. All right, thank you. That looks like everybody. I'll go ahead and close the poll out, and then I can share the responses with you so you know how everyone responded. It looks like the majority of you clicked that you are an educator earning a contact hour for licensure renewal. Contact hours to accumulate for a CEU can be earned by those who participate in the live broadcast of webinars in the World Language Webinars series. Today's webinar is 1 hour long, so 1 contact hour or 0.1 CEUs can be earned. Please save the email receipt you receive from the GoToWebinar system to document this contact hour towards a CEU for licensure renewal. This is a content activity for world languages, and please note that local LEAs or districts or charter schools must approve professional development offerings. I have set up our broadcast today so that that email receipt with your certificate of participation attached will be sent to your email address that you registered with about 2 hours after our broadcast ends today. Please look for your email receipt and the certificate of participation in your email box tomorrow morning. In addition, a recording is being made of today's webinar, and the archive, including these slides, will be available for local training approximately 1 week from today. These materials can be used as professional development locally with contact hours documented by the district or school. And that's helpful for some of you who are here as teacher leaders, as it says, about 1/3 of you, sharing information with colleagues, as well as some administrators we have gathering materials for local presentations. I also see that we have some individuals getting a question answered, and I hope we'll get to all of your questions today before we sign off. All right, thank you so much for answering the poll question. I'm going to go ahead and move us forward from that. I don't see any questions in the question box right now, so we are good there. So let's go ahead and get started talking about our World Language Essential Standards, or WLES as we sometimes call them. Those are our state standards, and specifically our K-12 modern language programs within them. We have several different program models for modern language programs. We know, of course, that modern language programs involve the study of languages that are first or native language in use today somewhere in the world. These languages are offered as individual subjects. So you have, for example, Spanish class or Chinese class or ASL class offered separately. In North Carolina, we have a number of modern languages that are currently being studied, including American Sign Language, Arabic, Cherokee, French, German, Modern Greek, Hebrew, Italian, Japanese, Mandarin, Russian, and Spanish, as well as Turkish and some others, Urdu, for example. Additional languages can be added at any time based on our state standards and local decisions. You can see the current list of our recent languages on the World Languages of North Carolina document, which is on our landing page of our Google site. Modern language instruction is a vital part of a global ready curriculum, as you know. In North Carolina, within our standards, we have several program models that are defined in the standards. First, we have, for elementary grades, FLES, or Foreign Language in the Elementary School, FLES. These are language-focused and or content-enriched programs that are also sometimes called early start programs. FLES program variations that do not meet the 90 minutes per week minimum, because in order to build proficiency, we know you have to have at least 90 minutes of instruction per week or more. If you have an elementary program or even a middle school program that is less than 90 minutes per week, you do not have a FLES program or early start. What you actually have is a foreign language exploratory program, or FLEX, which is the acronym for that. That can be offered K-8. And of course, in the middle school, you might have a FLEX program in order to introduce languages that can be taken at the high school to younger students. So that might be part of their schedule. We also have middle school programs, and these programs are for grades 6 through 8. We have two types of programs at the middle school according to our standards. We have beginning programs for students who've never studied a language before, so they are beginning learners, of course. And then we have continuing programs, so students who have had language instruction before in that particular language and are continuing that work. In addition, we have high school programs in modern languages, levels 1 through 8. And some of you know that offerings are determined locally, so you may not have all 8 levels at your school for modern language programs. But within the standards, there's the possibility of offering levels 1 through 8 for high school credit. High school programs, and all of these programs you see here for middle school and the FLES for elementary, are language-focused programs that build proficiency in the modern language. As part of our standards, we have proficiency-based outcomes for each language program and each type of language. These outcomes are designed to be challenging yet reasonable. They're based on the latest research we had when we wrote the standards, as well as feedback from teachers across North Carolina about what their students could learn at different grade levels and at different times and through different programs. The proficiency-based outcomes are adjusted for a variety of things, including instructional time. For example, we talked about FLES programs need at least 90 minutes of instruction per week or more. And so if you have that situation, you have to keep in mind how often students are meeting for formal instruction. When students get older and are middle school or high school programs, they have one class period every day or every other day, depending on the schedule they have, like a block schedule or something else. So again, that instructional time goes into the reasoning for those proficiency-based outcomes. You also have to consider the developmental age of the learner when you talk about proficiency-based outcomes. For example, very young students, let's say kindergarten through 2nd grade, have not yet developed reading and writing skills to the point where they can be transferred into the language they're learning. What that means is, developmentally, in a world language classroom, we can focus on speaking and listening quite a bit, but we may have to wait until students are in the 3rd grade or more before we really focus intensely on reading and writing. That will give them time to develop those skills in their first language, and it will make the transfer of those skills easier to the language that they're learning. We also have proficiency-based outcomes adjusted based on language type. For example, we have alphabetical languages, languages that use an alphabet, just like English, where you have a letter or a symbol of some kind that associates with a sound for a word. We also have logographic languages, and that's where you have not an alphabet, but a symbol that associates with meaning, like, for example, with Chinese and Japanese. And finally, we have visual languages, like American Sign Language, where you use viewing a lot because you have a sign language instead of a spoken language. So our proficiency-based outcomes are adjusted to accommodate all those different language types and how much time it would take someone, for example, who's a native English speaker, like most of our students are in North Carolina, to develop skills for each of those different types of languages. If, for example, you have a native English-speaking student studying French or German or Arabic that are all alphabetic languages, the transfer of skills is a little bit easier than it is when they are studying a logographic language. So it takes them a little bit longer, for example, especially to develop reading and writing skills in a logographic language because they're dealing with a totally different type of writing system that they have to learn how to understand. With visual languages, again, you're dealing with signs as opposed to an alphabet or symbols. And so it adjust the time that students develop proficiency when they're studying that language. All that information is already, like I said, included in what we do with the standards and has been shared as part of our proficiency-based outcomes. Let's take a closer look at those for just a minute to think about proficiency-based outcomes and how that looks in the classroom. And I know most of you on here are teachers or administrators with languages, so you probably have some experience with this already. On this slide, we see those proficiency-based outcomes for FLES and middle school programs, both beginning and continuing. When we were writing the standards, we looked a lot at research, as well as worked with focus groups of teachers to think about how we should set these proficiency outcomes for different programs and different levels of students, different ages of students, as you know, as well as the different types of languages. So for our modern language outcomes for FLES and middle school programs, this covers all types of languages: alphabetic, logographic, and visual. Notice that each of the communication modes is assessed, and we have a goal for proficiency after a certain amount of time of study. For FLES and middle school programs, that goal was set after a certain number of years of study because, again, we're relying on the idea that students are getting at least 90 minutes of instruction per week or perhaps more. You see that proficiency builds over time, but at different rates and in different ways for the communication modes. Part of that is the color coding on the chart, and part of it is the knowledge you have already about our proficiency levels and sublevels and how that might look. So notice this chart, like I said, is really a K-8 chart, either for FLES or middle school beginning and continuing courses. And we know that particularly in these grade levels, there are multiple entry points. So you might have a modern language program that begins with all kindergartners, or you might have a modern language program that doesn't begin until 4th grade. So again, we look at how many years of study total has a student had to base our proficiency outcomes on. I'll give you a chance to look at that chart for just a moment. And what I want you to do, because we're going to look at several other charts here as we talk about proficiency outcomes for different types of language programs, I want you to pick on this chart and on the charts that follow that we'll look at, two different columns. This one, of course, is, like I said, as at the end of a certain number of years of study. And some of them are adjusted in different ways. But I want you to pick two right now to follow as we go through the charts. All right, hope you've had a chance to do that. Now, one thing I should have mentioned before, but I'll certainly mention now, is that some of the things I'm saying, I'm quoting directly from our standards document, and you'll find a lot of information in our notes document about where I've gotten that and so forth. So for example, the slides we've just been talking about with K-12 modern language programs and the charts that you're seeing are all in the Introduction to Modern Language Programs sections of our state standards document on pages 11 through 14. That information is in the notes so that it's there if you want to use these materials locally, but I wanted to let you know too where that information is located should you want to look it up and get more details. All right, so you've picked two columns to follow here. If you've picked, let's say, the first two columns here about the end of 2nd year of study and the end of 3rd year of study, I want you to follow that and pick the first two columns on the next several charts as we go through them. So we've just been looking at the K-8 proficiency outcomes of proficiency-based programs. And now I'm going to move to the high school credit courses that are offered through the standards, levels 1 through 8, as I told you. but for alphabetic languages. So again, these are languages that have an alphabet of some kind. Maybe it's Arabic, maybe it's Cherokee, French, German, Russian, Spanish. All of those languages are alphabetic in nature. And so here you see what we would expect students to be able to do from a proficiency standpoint for each of the different communication modes and domains. So listening, reading, speaking and writing, as well as person-to-person or interpersonal communication. Notice how this builds over time. So at the end of level 1, for example, most students are at the novice mid proficiency, with the exception of their skills in presentational speaking, because it takes a little bit longer to develop those. Notice that pattern follows throughout. As students progress through the levels of instruction, they get higher and higher levels of proficiency until they reach the upper levels, where we start to see some overlap, like in levels 7 through 8. One of the reasons that this happens is that, again, proficiency builds at different rates depending on what language you have as your first or home language. But also, as you develop proficiency over time, the further up you go on the proficiency scale, the longer it takes to reach the next sub-level. And so you notice that the outcomes for example, levels 7 and 8 at the end of the chart on the far right side encompass several levels, because you're still building proficiency, but you wouldn't necessarily notice a whole step up to the next level by the end of a particular course. You continue to work on building your proficiency. Also notice, though we didn't mention before, that our charts go up through the advanced mid proficiency level. Of course, if you're aware, as all of you are, about the actual proficiency scale, you know that it goes up to the level called distinguished. However, the writers and reviewers of our World Language Essential Standards, as well as the stakeholders who provided feedback on the drafts, agreed that for K-12 World Language Program proficiency expectations, that even in the most well-articulated K-12 program, the highest level of proficiency a student could be reasonably expected to reach would be advanced mid. Of course, we might have advanced students who do go beyond into advanced high or superior or even distinguished, but we needed to set these proficiency outcomes for all students who are in the programs. And as I said, they're designed to be challenging, yet reasonable for what can be accomplished in a K-12 program, given the instructional time and other parameters that we have to work with. So this is for alphabetic languages, and like I said, I'd like you to pick 2 of the columns so you can watch how they change as we look at different types of languages. On the next slide coming up, we have the same kind of chart, but now for logographic languages like Chinese and Japanese. Notice that we still have a step up. Notice that the interpersonal skills remain the same, because when you're listening to someone or learning just to speak the language, that process works the same. Once you involve literacy skills where you need to read and write, there's a difference for logographic languages when you're coming from an alphabetic language. So more time is provided based on these proficiency outcomes so that students can develop those skills and still advance their proficiency over time as they continue the study of language. Do keep in mind too, as we know, that students can also be learning language not just inside a classroom, but they might be developing their proficiency in other ways outside the classroom, especially in our modern world with all the technology we have and the opportunity in social media and other applications to reach out to speakers of those languages around the world, literally, so that students can improve their proficiency in a variety of ways. Let's pause a moment and take a look at the chart here. And keep in mind how that's different from the charts we've already seen. I'm going to move on now to visual languages. Same kind of chart, same levels 1 through 8, but now we're talking about a visual language, American Sign Language, or ASL. In this case, we've had some changes. Notice on the left-hand side, when we talked about our communication modes before, we still have interpretive communication. Before, that was listening and reading. Within a visual language, you call that receptive skills, and for reading, finger spelling. They do have interpersonal skills, as we have seen with all spoken language, but they call that interactive, and so the chart has been changed to reflect the proper terminology for visual languages. They also have presentational communication skills, and where we had speaking and writing, they have expressive skills, and glossing skills. So again, we've made some changes, but they're still developing the same types of skills within the language, and they still use the actual proficiency scale and have a way to build proficiency over time. However, now if you're following those same two columns, let's say level 1 and level 2, you'll see that in a signed language, proficiency builds at a slightly different rate, and some would argue an even faster rate for certain skills than it does in spoken languages. That's just one of the differences about language types that we take into account for our proficiency outcomes. All right, so now we've looked at what's in the standards, we reviewed our charts a bit. Let's go ahead and talk about some other things that are available to you for modern language program support. One thing I always like to point out is that we have a relatively new NCDPI World Languages Google site. Many of you are familiar with our World Languages Wiki, and those ceased to exist because the company went out of business in January of 2019. So all of our items have been moved to our new home with Google Sites, and it's at the sites you see there. We have a very long URL or web address about sites.google.com/dpi.nc.gov/worldlanguages, and then we have a bit.ly link, so bit.ly/ncdpiwl for world languages. That's just a screenshot to show you that everything is there that we had before and has been moved over so that you can still find it as part of your work. One thing I want to also let you know is that some of our materials were updated. Obviously, we had some things posted on the wiki that referenced web pages on the wiki, and so we had to update that. We've also had some changes in other things, and so one of the things we've updated to make sure it's a resource ready to use is our administrator guides. You know that we developed these as a support tool for the implementation of our World Language Essential Standards, and the administrator guide for modern world language programs is posted here. It's also a handout in your control panel, and I would encourage you to go there now on your control panel and find the handout section and download our newly updated administrator guide for world languages, specifically for modern language programs. I'll give you a moment to do that, and I'll kind of stop and see if we have any questions before we go on. All right, now that you've had a chance, I hope, to download our administrator guide for modern language programs, you can see that this document is a very compact version that starts with an overview of our World Language Essential Standards, or WLES, structure, and includes information about the actual proficiency scale. This is to help others, particularly administrators, as it's named, understand how our standards work, how they're organized, and what's involved in those standards and in teaching world languages in a modern classroom that's focused on building proficiency. There's also information about research and testing results that come from the study of world languages in general. This is to emphasize the importance of world languages in any curriculum as a benefit to all students. This increases academic achievement, and there's also information about things like advanced placement or AP world language exams, where students could possibly be earning college credit for their study of languages in high school as they go on to campuses in higher education. On the back of that first page, you see there's information about expectations and outcomes, including things like our charts that you just saw before regarding different proficiency outcomes for different courses. And then the last two pages, or the second page, if you print this back to back, is a feedback tool that's aligned to our North Carolina Educator Evaluation System, or NESIS standards 1 through 5. Those standards, of course, are the standards that every teacher in North Carolina is evaluated on. And what we have done is taken those 5 standards and integrated them with the TEL, or Teacher Effectiveness for Language Learning, project materials, so that we can weave best practices in world languages into a tool for administrators to look for those best practices in a world language classroom. Many times our administrators have received world language instruction in a very different environment from what we have now in proficiency-based or in communicative-based programs where we learn to use the language. And so it's important that we communicate the message about what good world language instruction looks like and what we mean by proficiency-based instruction in the classroom. We do have administrator guides for all of our programs. You're looking at the one for modern language programs. There's also one for dual and heritage language programs, which encompasses dual language immersion and heritage language or native speakers programs. And we have an administrator guide for classical language programs when Latin or ancient Greek or those sorts of languages are being taught. All of those are updated from what we had initially, and they are all on our World Languages Google site for you to use. Another tool that we have that you may be interested in using or maybe are already using is a program resource. They are affectionately called COCOs, but what they are is our clarifying objectives by course, so clarifying objectives for each of our standards based on those proficiency outcomes. And those documents have been created so that teachers can write local curriculum that is standards-based specifically. Those clarifying objectives by course documents are sometimes called COCOs or CO2 documents, and they are on our World Languages website. The web page I'm going to take you to in a moment to show you where those are at actually has those materials for all 18 languages that are currently being taught in our K-12 schools and has an expansion set for any additional languages that are added. Let's go ahead and go out. Notice that there's a screenshot of what this looks like, but I want to show you online where that's at. This is our World Languages website coming up. And we have these materials linked in a variety of ways, but the way that I think is easiest to find them is under the Resources tab. So I'm just mousing over that Resources tab in the upper right-hand corner. Notice that one of the first things that comes up is Clarifying Objectives by Course Outcomes. When I click on that, the page you just saw the screenshot up comes up. As we look through that, what it has is an explanation of what these documents are. They are presented as Word documents so that teachers can work with them very closely as they develop their local curriculum based on our state standards. So they can just download the Word document and start typing into it directly. Notice that we then have a whole set of materials for each language that's taught, and you just click on the language you want so that you can see all of those materials. I'm going to go ahead and click on Spanish. Just as an example of a modern language that we have. Notice that when we get over to the Spanish K-12 page, it has another repeat of the explanation of what the COCOs are for Spanish courses. And then we have those materials for all of the language programs we just talked about in modern languages. Here are elementary school courses. In addition to having the information about needing instruction 90 minutes a week or more, there's also information about FLEX programs and how they're different. There's information about using the course codes appropriately for different elementary school offerings that are part of a FLES program. And so you see here they have examples. Notice we have Nikki on the left-hand side. Nikki is our future ready graduate, and this is the elementary version of Nikki. As we go through, what you see right underneath that is, in fact, all of those Word documents contained on a Google Drive that you can download and use for as a teacher or with your teachers if you're doing professional development as an administrator or teacher leader. As we continue down the page, the next one up is our middle school courses. We talked about how we have beginning courses and continuing courses, and just like we discussed, there is information about those, about what they cover and how they're constructed, and then there's course codes for those so you can use the correct ones. Then of course we also have the middle school version of Nikki, again on the left-hand side, so that we stay true to where we are developmentally with students. And again, right underneath that are the middle school COCOs documents for teachers to download and start using. I will note that on the COCOs documents, when you download them, they also have this course code information on them so that teachers never lose that and you always have a quick reference for that. Because Spanish is a language that's also taught in dual and heritage courses, we have these same types of materials for our K-8 dual language immersion or DLI literacy courses. And again, we have those documents they can download, K through 8. And then we get to our high school courses. And just like we talked, there are 8 levels there. You can see there's some information about those different 8 levels. There's information, for example, about how middle schools can offer high school credit courses that are here. There's information about how our community college world language courses have also been crosswalked or aligned, and there's a link to that, as well as, again, information on course codes that you would use for different campuses. So whether you're at a high school or a middle school teaching high school credit courses or at a community college, all of your course codes and information is laid out here in one place. Once again, then, we have the materials right underneath that teachers can use to build their local curriculum. And you notice on the far left-hand side, we have heritage programs, because right underneath that, again, is information about dual and heritage, because Spanish is taught as a heritage language. And so we have sort of the course sequence, the course codes for that, and information about that for teachers. In addition, because Spanish is also offered as an AP world language and in other areas like International Baccalaureate, IB, and Cambridge, we have information about those advanced learning programs for this language, and again, the course codes and all the information you would need as a teacher or as an administrator to support that program. So this is just one example. This is our Spanish page, and as I said, and as you saw on the page before, you can go to see those types of materials and support documents for any language that we teach. All right. So that brings us to the end of our overview and discussion about how our K-12 modern language programs look in our World Language Essential Standards. So let's talk about our next poll question here. And thinking about that, which information that we just discussed about modern language programs was most interesting to you? Was it the modern language program information in the WLES, our World Language Essential Standards? Was it the K-12 proficiency outcomes and sequence charts that you saw? Was it the administrator guide for modern language programs? Was it resources online like the COCOS or CO2 documents? Or maybe you want to say it was some other resource or more than one of the above. So I'm going to go ahead and run this poll question so that you can share what you're thinking about that. And then I'll pause also and check the questions box. Thank you for being so quick with the polls. It looks like we're picking up speed on those. I'll give us 5 more seconds to finish out our voting on those. All right, thank you for completing the poll. I'm going to close that out and then share with you what the results are. All right, so 45% of you indicated that you liked the resources online, like the COCOS documents and things, and know that you can always go to get those anytime you have a connection to the internet. A little over a third of you also said you couldn't pick just one, so you said other or more than one of the above. And several of you also mentioned you like the K-12 proficiency outcomes and sequence charts, or the administrator guide for modern language programs. That's a handout in our webinar today. Great, thank you for sharing that. I don't see any questions at this time, and I do want to keep us on track with time, so I'm going to go ahead and move on from this into our next section of the webinar. At this time, I'd like to introduce Dr. Leslie Baldwin. She's the World Languages Program Manager at Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools, and she's going to share with us today how her district is structured when it comes to world language programs and what they offer in regards especially to modern language programs K-12. Leslie is online with us today. She's got control of her own audio. And I do want to mention before she starts that one of the inspirations for this particular webinar series to showcase our K-12 programs was because people really wanted to hear from other schools and districts about how they set up their programs, how they were structured, and how they maintained them and grew them over time. Kind of like a virtual site visit, if you will, to talk about programming and think about how you could replicate or learn from those. So with that, Dr. Baldwin, I'll let you go ahead.
All right, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're loud and clear.
Okay, good. I'm connected from a phone and some earbuds, so I wasn't quite sure how it would work today. I've been the World Languages Coordinator in Winston-Salem for 15 years. And our programs have changed, some grown, some shrunk in that time. There's been change along the way. You can go to the next slide, Anne-Marie. Thanks. So just to give a little background, our district is the 4th largest in the state. We have about 54,000 students and 80 plus schools in the district. So it's a fairly large district. In our elementary schools, we used to have a FLES program, but no longer do. We still have FLES only in our one IB elementary school because of the requirement of language there. However, we do have immersion programs in 8 schools. We have 4 one-way programs that are for native speakers. Those are developmental programs in Spanish. We have 3 two-way programs that are Spanish, and then we have a one-way Chinese immersion program as well. So we do have language opportunities at the elementary level, just not across the board for all students. In middle schools, our students can earn their level 1 credit and then move on into level 2 in high school, or they can certainly start level 1 in high school if they choose to do that. Our middle schools all have a 6th grade requirement for their electives. So the students have to take an arts class, they have to take a career tech class in 6th grade, and they have to take a language class in 6th grade. And then after that, they can choose what they want to do. That ensures that they have exposure to our different elective areas in the 6th grade and then can make choices based on that afterwards. In our high schools, we go into AP and IB classes up through those levels. Our programs include Latin, we have French, German, Spanish, Chinese, Japanese, American Sign Language, and Spanish for heritage speakers as well. You can go to the next slide. As I said, we did have a district-wide FLES program. We had a program in all of our elementary schools that was twice a week for about 50 minutes, and we won the ACTFL award for that program. However, that was locally funded, which meant it was a pretty expensive program to staff because all of the teacher positions were funded with local money, not state positions. And so in the economic downturn about 8 years or so ago, after many cuts in the district, the board really did try to hang on to that program. After several years of cuts and cuts and cuts to the budget, the FLES program was lost, which was a shame. However, as I said, we have the immersion program, so maybe there's some trade-off there. 3 years ago, we added American Sign Language at the high school level, and that has really exploded out of the gate. That's been a very popular program with students. Our Spanish heritage classes have really grown over the last 10 years. They started out as a pretty small program in a couple of high schools, and now we have it in most of our middle and high schools or wherever the population warrants that course. 15 years ago, we had one immersion program, one two-way program that wasn't maybe exactly a two-way program, but we did a lot of work with a FLAP grant and improved that, and since then have added the 2 other Spanish immersion programs as well as the Chinese. And our other immersion programs, the other one-way programs that are developmental, began as transitional programs for those students and now are all developmental so that they're not losing the instruction in Spanish and maintain that throughout elementary school. Next slide. So, as I said, we have Spanish, French, Spanish heritage in our middle schools. Those are in most of our schools. It really just kind of depends upon enrollment. There is German in one middle school. That's an IB middle school, so there's more focus on language there. The logographic languages, the Chinese and Japanese, are only available at high school, and American Sign Language is only available at high school. Latin is available at 3 middle schools, and then, of course, most of our high schools. As I said, students can do their level 1 credit in middle school and start level 2 in high school, or if they don't choose to do that, they can, of course, start level 1 in high school. An interesting trend with that program model is that over the past few years, we've seen a shift in that middle school enrollment has increased and high school enrollment has decreased just a little bit. And it's because more students are taking advantage of the level 1 credit in middle school and then moving into the high school level 2 course. It used to be that at high school, the level 1 courses were very high in enrollment as well as level 2. And now in high school, the level 1 courses, the enrollment is lower than it used to be because so many students are getting it in middle school. And then that allows them time to move on to upper classes, upper level classes if they want to. If they're in Spanish, it gives them more time to be able to take AP Language and AP Literature, which is sometimes getting to that AP Lit course is a little hard to do in our schedule. And that gives an opportunity for that. One thing that's helpful to our program is that all of our middle schools run the same kind of schedule and the same kind of program, so there's consistency there. It's all year-long classes that meet every other day, so it's not like one school can choose to do something with their schedule that would then impact the ability for consistent instruction. It allows our middle school teachers to use the same materials as our high school level 1 teachers, so there's a lot of consistency there in moving from middle to high school. All of our high school courses are 90 minutes every other day. So they're year-long courses on a modified block. So they see the kids every other day, but they see them for 90 minutes in high school. That's how all of those work. Next slide. As far as future expansion, we are expanding our Spanish immersion to middle school for next year, so that's a little bit of a building a plane while we fly it kind of thing. We are adding the level 4 for American Sign Language so that students can do all 4 years in that language in high school for next year. And so that's kind of what drives our growth is registration. It's really about demand. So if the demand is there, we work to meet it. And as long as students are signing up for courses, then we continue with that course, or we add the next level, or whatever is necessary. Winston-Salem has a bit of a unique situation at high school in that we have one central location for some of our courses in all content areas that might not have heavy enrollment at one particular high school, but if you pull students from multiple high schools together, then you can offer the course. So we have, one of our high schools is called the Career Center, and this school has AP courses in many content areas that might not have enough enrollment at one particular high school. And then they also have very specialized career tech courses as well, where students are earning certification in various career tech areas. So it has a lot of specialized courses, and that's where many of our AP language courses are, so that a course like AP French that might not have enough students at each high school to make, if we pull them together in a central location, we can offer the course. That's also where our Chinese and Japanese courses are available, again, with the idea of kind of pooling our resources into one location. You can go to the next slide. These are just some little screenshots of different newsletters, brochures we've created over time to help advertise what our programs are, especially like at things like the Magnet School Fair or recruitment events, that sort of thing, just to let the public know what it is we do, at what levels, what kinds of offerings we have, and when students can enter their language instruction and that sort of thing. I think that's about it for me, unless Anne-Marie, there's something else you wanted me to address that I have not.
That sounds good. I think you've given people a lot to think about, especially when they think about how you grow programs over time and how you make different languages and different levels of languages accessible to students. As you said, you do some very unique things in your district that people might be able to replicate or adapt in some way for their own language programs. I'm looking for questions for you right now in the question box. I don't see any right now, so we'll go ahead and run our poll question for this section. And it's similar to the last one we just did. Which information about Winston-Salem Forsyth County's modern language programs was most interesting to you? Was it the history of their programs, the pathways they've established for different types of languages? Was it how they expand programs? Was it what they do in sharing local offerings and sequences with like the brochures and newsletters and flyers you saw? Or was it something else, or perhaps more than one of those on the list? So I'll go ahead and launch that question so that you can share your thoughts. And again, I'll look for any questions for Dr. Baldwin on her presentation. All right, looks like we're almost done deciding on our poll question. Please go ahead and finish up, and then we're going to close out here in about 5 seconds on the poll. All right, thank you for that. So it looks like we're almost an even split on 3 different things. About a third of you were very interested in the pathways established for different types of languages, a third in how programs are expanded over time, and then a third of you who said other or more than one of those above. There are also 10% of you who said you liked what you saw in sharing those local offerings and sequences and how they advertise to some degree about their programs in the community so that others are aware of what is available for world languages, not only in modern language programs, but in classical languages and dual and heritage languages. I don't see any questions right now. You're certainly always welcome to add questions to the questions box for Dr. Baldwin. So we'll pause for a moment. All right. Well, thank you so much, Leslie, for sharing today what's happening in your district and how you support a wide variety of world language programs, including modern language programs K-12.
My pleasure. Thanks.
All right, I am conscious of our time. We'll go ahead and finish up today. We just have some reminders and resources to talk about, things coming up that you might be aware of or might want reminders about in case you already know about them. First and foremost, I want to let you know this is the final broadcast in our 2018-2019 World Language Webinar series. You see on the screen the 3 different components of our series. We had our DPI World Language Quarterly Updates. There were 4 of those because they're quarterly, of course. We had our Measuring World Language Proficiency series that focused on first credentialing with our Global Languages Endorsement, our State Seal by Literacy, as well as Formative Assessment and Summative Assessment. And then today we are finishing up with our Essential Standards K-12 Program Showcase series with our modern language programs. So they're all complete for the year. One thing to know is that this information is always posted on our webinar series information page. So the recordings from today, as well as the recordings from all the webinars you see here, the presentation slides, the handouts, and all of that information is available for you to use. Most recently, we've posted information from the Measuring World Language Proficiency webinar about summative assessment, as well as the World Language Quarterly Update webinar. Those were both in April. You see April 10th and April 24th. We also posted information about our Measuring World Language Proficiency with Formative Assessment, which was just last week, May 8th. And again, all of those materials are posted. I did want to share with you, too, a preview of what's coming up for 2019-2020. I would urge you to consider all of this information tentative that I'm about to share with you, but you might also want to start thinking about your own professional development or the professional development of other teachers that you work with, either as a teacher leader or as an administrator for this coming school year. We are planning another World Language Webinar series for 2019-2020 with the following components. We will offer our World Language Quarterly Updates again on the dates you see there. Those are tentative, but you see they're about mid-month in September, November, January, and March. Those include information relevant to us about the implementation of our state standards, as well as news that we can share statewide, regionally, nationally or even internationally that might be of help to you as a world language educator. We're also planning on doing a best practices in world language classrooms series next year. Those broadcasts will be in October, December, February, and April. As you can see, we end up with essentially one webinar per month, starting in September and going through April. These best practices in world language classrooms is built off some feedback I've received from across the state about the need to reinforce what administrators would see in a good world language classroom that they enter. And so we're going to talk about those best practices in world languages. We're going to look at the updated administrator guides, one of which you saw today, as well as think about how that could be better applied and how we could make others more aware. Of course, we know that teachers are always evaluated by their supervisor. Generally, that's the principal and that's the administrator you're working with, but sometimes it's other folks. And so sometimes, for example, we're working with school counselors. We want them to understand best practices in world language classrooms and, for example, how to schedule students effectively so they continue to build their proficiency and work towards higher levels of proficiency by reaching advanced classes. We also have that series for others who might be interested in just understanding how proficiency-based world language classrooms look, which might extend to all kinds of stakeholders, our colleagues in other classrooms and other content areas, as well as parents, perhaps. So that will be offered next year. In addition, we're going to be collaborating with our neighbors. The Southern Atlantic Language Collaborative, or SALC as it's called, is a collaborative group that we work with that includes North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Virginia. And so that group is wanting to work together to offer a series of webinars to all of the world language educators in our various states. And so the dates and topics for that are yet to be determined, or TBD. But we're probably going to focus on best practice topics. For example, maybe something like staying in the target language 90% of the time or more, or how to integrate comprehensive assessments. So how do we look at, for example, integrated performance assessments, or how do we structure things so that students are learning what they need to learn and able to demonstrate their understanding of the language and their work in the language in an authentic way. So those topics, like I said, and dates are to be determined, but that will be another offering. These will all be, by the way, 1-hour webinar broadcasts. We know teachers have busy days, and so devoting 1 hour at the end of it is hard, but probably manageable. Certainly our world language quarterly updates and best practices in world language classrooms are being planned for Wednesdays from 4 to 5 p.m., just like this year's world language webinar series. I don't know when our SALC regional broadcast will be planned, but again, we will always keep in mind that it's easier for teachers to do a professional development webinar after their duties at school are done for the day. So likely it will be an after school time, but we'll see what actual dates and days of the week they'll be. Do look for information about this and details to be posted on our webinar series information page on the website, including registration links when they're available. All right, moving on, some of our other reminders and resources. Don't forget FLANC, the Foreign Language Association of North Carolina, our state professional organization for all K-20 world language educators, is offering ShareFests in May. ShareFests are half-day, either morning or afternoon, unconference sessions across the state in different regions and for different purposes. Notice that there were several that ran earlier in this month, and they all run on Saturdays. Coming up this Saturday, we have still the DLI, or Dual Language Immersion ShareFest, happening in Charlotte in the morning, as well as the Northern Region ShareFest in Winston-Salem, also in the morning. You can get additional details by going to that FLANC ShareFest webpage you see linked on the slide. And again, that information and more is also available in the notes on this slide. In addition, FLANC has their annual fall conference coming up. This year will be in Winston-Salem. They always try to have the fall conference somewhere in the middle of the state so folks can get to that and that we won't be interrupted by any bad weather. As we know, that's still part of hurricane season, October is. And so on October 25th to the 26th will be the FLANC Fall Conference. Please know that that conference has proposals that have been accepted for 3-hour workshops on that Friday evening or Saturday afternoon, 50-minute sessions that are available all day Friday and Saturday of the conference, research roundtables for our higher education colleagues in particular, and even some pre-conference webinars that will run Monday through Wednesday before the conference starts on Friday. So there's lots of opportunities to get involved and learn from the presenters at FLANC. Registration officially opened on May 1st, and you see the FLANC website where you can get more information about that and register to join your colleagues there in October. I'm pausing for a moment because we did just get a note from in the questions box. Emily wanted to share that the Share Fest that she attended, the Western one, which was just last Saturday, was really great, and she enjoyed that and got a lot out of that. Wonderful. And I know that FLANC has worked hard to provide a variety of opportunities at different times and in different ways for all of us as K-20 world language educators. All right. I just have a few more things before we go today. Our world language listservs are always available and free to anyone to sign up on. You can subscribe to any DPI listservs or updates that you would like. You can click on the links you see there. Notice we have 4 for world languages. We have one specifically for dual language immersion educators, one for those using NC Linguafolio, one for world language instructors K-20, and then a very general one, the World Language Education News. So you can sign up for any and all of those. You do get announcements about webinars like this, things like from FLANC, and all kinds of resources and materials. I would also encourage you to sign up for other DPI listservs that are of interest to you or will help in your work. There's listservs, for example, for charter schools, for global education. There's one for legislative updates. You can hear the latest information coming out of our legislature that's currently meeting. There's one for teachers of English learners, and so on and so forth in other content areas and in other initiatives. So always look to that as a way to get information about what's happening at the state level and what materials and resources are available for our standards. That brings us to our close today. As you know, I am Anne-Marie Gunter, your World Languages Consultant. You see my contact information with email and phone number there. Please note, I do have a new phone number. We've reorganized a bit with our cubicles here. We also have the World Languages Google site, as you see there, and I've sort of noted where these materials will be posted. They'll be posted under Professional Development on our webinar series information page, so that's what's indicated there. And then you see the links to the website, as well as information about our NCDPI World Languages Facebook page. I would encourage everyone to like that on Facebook if you're on Facebook. I tend to put a lot of classroom resources out on our Facebook page that you might be able to use, blog posts and things like that from teachers around the world and certainly around the country, sharing what they do in their classroom, including ones here in North Carolina and in the Southeast region. I also sometimes repost what we have shared on the listservs, so look for that as another information resource that you can use. I'm going to pause here a moment. We are good on time. I thank you all for joining us today. I hope you've learned something new that you can take back and use in your own work. And I want to thank Dr. Baldwin for joining us today and sharing about her programs in Winston-Salem and Forsyth County schools. It's always important that we learn from each other about what works for world languages.